On the morning of my 64th birthday, my son-in-law sat down at my kitchen table, the one my late husband built from a single piece of black walnut in 1987, and told me I should start thinking about transitioning to something more manageable. He used those exact words, transitioning to something more manageable, like I was a business process in need of optimization, like 64 was a diagnosis. I said, "Would you like more coffee, Keith?" and poured him a cup without waiting for his answer. 3 months later, I was standing on a balcony in Porto, Portugal, watching the Douro River catch the last of the evening sun, drinking a glass of vinho verde that cost $8, thinking about how quiet it was. My phone showed 4 missed calls from my daughter. I set it face down on the railing and watched the river instead. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Lucille Ann Pearson. My friends call me Lou. I spent 31 years as a labor and delivery nurse at Mercy Regional Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. I have brought 4,200 babies into this world, give or take. I know what it looks like when something is ending and what it looks like when something is beginning. I have held both in my hands, sometimes on the same shift. My husband Harold passed in January 2019. Colon cancer, caught in stage 3, gone by stage 4. We had 11 months between diagnosis and funeral. 11 months to say everything, which sounds like a lot until it isn't. We had 37 years together. A brick colonial on Clearwater Drive in Westerville, a daughter named Sasha, who was our whole world, and a life that was small in the way. Good lives are small, full of the same faces, the same table, the same rituals repeated until they became love. Harold was a carpenter, not professionally by the time I knew him. He sold insurance for Nationwide, wore a tie 5 days a week, coached youth baseball on weekends. But in the garage, on evenings and Saturdays, he made things. The kitchen table, a jewelry box he gave me on our 10th anniversary, bookshelves lining the hallway, a cradle for Sasha that she saved and used for her own daughter years later. When Harold got sick, he worked right up until he couldn't anymore. His last project was a small writing desk for the guest room. He finished it in October, 2 months before he died. "You'll want somewhere to sit and write letters," he told me. I didn't write letters. I never had, but I understood what he meant. After Harold died, the house got very loud with silence. Sasha was living in Cincinnati then, 45 minutes away. She and Keith had been married 6 years. Keith worked in commercial real estate, drove a pickup truck that cost more than my first house, and had opinions about everything from tax policy to the correct way to load a dishwasher. He was not a bad man. He was the particular kind of man who believes he is always the most practical person in the room. In the first year, Sasha came home every other weekend. We'd cook together, go through Harold's things slowly the way grief requires. She'd sleep in her old room, and we'd stay up too late drinking decaf and talking. It was good. It was what I needed. In the second year, the visits thinned. Monthly, then every 6 weeks. Keith was busy. There was a project in Louisville, then one in Nashville. Sasha was working part-time doing HR consulting and trying to get pregnant, which was its own long road. I won't detail here because it wasn't mine to carry. I went back to work part-time. 3 shifts a week at Mercy, labor and delivery. It helped. The work helped. Coming home to a quiet house was easier after 10 hours of hard, purposeful noise. In March 2021, Sasha called on a Sunday evening. "Mom, we need to ask you something and I need you to really think about it before you say yes." I was cutting up a chicken for soup. "Go ahead." "Keith and I have been trying to figure out childcare, and the waiting lists at the good places are insane, and we thought, if you're open to it, what if we moved in with you, just for a year or 2, Until we figure out the daycare situation, save a little extra. You're pregnant, I said. A pause. 8 weeks. I was going to tell you Sunday, but I'm telling you now. I set down the knife. I was going to be a grandmother. The house on Clearwater Drive, where Sasha had grown up, where Harold had built things with his hands, where I had been lonely for 2 years, it was going to have children in it again. Come home, I said. They moved in on a Saturday in May. Sasha brought her mother's instinct and her good humor. Keith brought a moving truck, 16 boxes labeled Keith's office supplies, and a philosophy about how a household should run. The first few months were fine, more than fine. Sasha was visibly pregnant by July, glowing the way some women do, and I made her the same red raspberry leaf tea my mother made me, and we sat on the back porch in the evenings and talked about names. She wanted Ruth for a girl. Keith wanted something more curt. They compromised on nothing and kept discussing. The baby arrived in November. A girl. They named her Cleo, which I loved immediately. For about 4 months, things were tender and closed the way new babies make things. I'd get up for the 2 a.m. feeding sometimes just to hold Cleo so Sasha could sleep. I'd been a labor and delivery nurse for 3 decades. I wasn't frightened by infant cries the way first-time parents are. I knew how to read a newborn. It was the most useful I'd felt in years. Then Cleo started sleeping through the night, and Keith started working from home full-time. He took the guest room, Harold's writing desk, the last thing Harold made, got moved to the basement temporarily to make room for a standing desk and 2 monitors. I carried it down myself because I didn't want Keith's hands on it. He had calls starting at 7 in the morning and was particular about noise. The television volume in the living room became a negotiation. My Tuesday night phone calls with my friend Paulette from church, I moved them to the back porch because Keith needed to concentrate. In January, in Ohio, Sasha saw what was happening and apologized in the small private ways wives apologize for their husbands, a hand on my arm, a look across the dinner table. He's just stressed, she'd say quietly. I'd nod and say it was fine. It wasn't fine, but I loved my daughter and I adored Cleo, and I told myself this was what family was. You make room. You adjust. Harold adjusted for 37 years. I could adjust for 2. The grocery situation became a point of tension I wasn't prepared for. I had shopped at the same Kroger for 22 years. I had certain things I kept in the house. Whole milk. Real butter. The good bacon, not the turkey kind. A particular brand of coffee that Harold had drunk. And I had kept buying out of habit, and now out of choice. My kitchen, my house, my provisions. Keith was doing a thing called clean eating. He and Sasha had decided together, postpartum, to reset their diets. This was fine. What was less fine was the Tuesday in February when I came home from a shift to find the coffee I drank had been replaced by something called 4-sigmatic mushroom blend because regular coffee is inflammatory and this one has lion's mane, which is incredible for cognitive function in older adults. He said older adults the way people say it when they mean you specifically. I poured the mushroom blend down the sink, went back to Kroger, and bought 3 bags of my coffee. I did not say anything about it. In April, 14 months after they'd moved in, Keith sat down at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning. Sasha was at a yoga class. Cleo was napping. He had the particular posture of a man who has rehearsed. Lou, I want to talk to you about something and I hope you'll hear me out. I was making biscuits. I kept making biscuits. The thing is, this arrangement has been incredible for us. Really, you've been so generous. But Sasha and I have been talking honestly about what the next phase looks like. He paused. For everyone. I pressed the biscuit cutter into the dough. Go on. This house is a lot for one person to maintain. 3 bedrooms, the yard, the repairs. Harold kept everything up, but since he's been gone, you said yourself it's a lot. I had never said that, not once. We've done some research. There's a community called Hearthstone over in Ghana that has really wonderful reviews. Independent living, not assisted living. Your own apartment. Activities, people your age. Sasha's been there twice, and she thinks you'd really love it. I cut another biscuit. How many times has Sasha visited? He blinked. Twice? She went twice to a senior living community to evaluate it for me and didn't mention it. We wanted to have all the information before we end this house. I set down the cutter. What were you imagining would happen to this house? Keith looked at the table. Well, Sasha is on the deed. When Harold passed, you transferred. I know you remember. And we thought, since Cleo's here, since we're a growing family, it would make sense for this to become our primary residence. You'd still be close. Hearthstone is 12 minutes away. 12 minutes. 37 years of my life and Harold's hands in every cabinet, and the plan was 12 minutes away. I see, I said. My biscuits needed 10 more minutes. We're not saying right away, Keith continued, gaining confidence the way men do when they aren't immediately stopped. We were thinking fall, give you the summer to look around, get settled somewhere. Hearthstone has a waiting list, but Sasha already put your name down. My daughter had put my name on a waiting list. Thank you for telling me, I said. Excuse me. I need to check on the biscuits. I pulled them from the oven, covered them with a dish towel, and walked upstairs to the bedroom Harold and I had shared for 22 years in this house. I sat on the edge of the bed. The quilt my mother made was folded at the foot. Harold's nightstand still had his reading glasses on it because I'd never moved them. My hands were steady. I felt the same thing I imagine women feel when they've been told something they already knew, something they've been folding small and storing away for months, and now it has finally been said out loud, and there is a relief in the naming of it, even when what's been named is a wound. I thought about what Harold said near the end. We were watching rain through the bedroom window, and he turned to me and said, Lou, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life being useful to other people. I thought he meant our daughter. I thought it was a specific instruction about not becoming a live-in babysitter. I hadn't thought about what else he might have meant. I went to the closet. Harold's side, which I still called Harold's side even 3 years later. On the top shelf, behind his old baseball mitt and a shoebox of photographs, there was a steel document box I'd moved from house to house for 20 years without opening. Harold had handled all the paperwork. That was our division. I handled everything biological and he handled everything administrative. I knew the document box existed. I'd never had cause to open it. The key was on Harold's keychain, which I still kept in my nightstand drawer. I opened the box. There was a letter on top. Lou, if you're reading this without me there, then something went wrong and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm not there to hand this to you myself and explain it like I should have explained it years ago. You always thought I was bad with money. I know you did. The way I'd go quiet when bills came up, the way I'd say, we're fine, without showing you the numbers. I wasn't hiding debt. I was hiding the opposite. I grew up watching my mother work herself to the bone and have nothing to show for it. And I made a decision when I was 26 years old that the woman I married would never be in that position. So I put money away. Starting small. A few hundred a month into accounts you weren't watching because you trusted me and I was trying to deserve that trust. Life insurance, $750,000. Policy with MetLife, number attached. IRA accounts at Fidelity, $490,000. Details on the sheet clipped to this letter. The rental property, I bought a duplex in 2004, 1142 Morse Road. You knew I was helping my brother with a real estate thing. I was the real estate thing. It's paid off. Current value around $280,000. A property manager named Darnell Williams has been renting it. His number is in the folder. Lou, we never struggled because I made sure we wouldn't. You kept this family alive in every way that mattered, and I kept the numbers, and neither of us talked about it enough. I'm sorry for that. Take the money and live. Not for Sasha, not for anyone else's plan. For you. I love you to the end of every road. Harold. I read the letter 4 times. Then I looked at the fidelity statements, the MetLife policy documentation, a folder with Darnell Williams's business card, rental income statements, property tax records. My late husband, the insurance salesman who built furniture on weekends and coached baseball and never once let me see him worry, had spent 30 years building a floor beneath me. Total value, as of the most recent statements, just over $1.5 million. I had been stretching my nurse's pension and Social Security for 3 years, clipping coupons, declining invitations that cost money, while a property manager deposited $2,800 a month in rent into an account I'd never accessed. 34 months of rental income sitting untouched, $95,000 I hadn't known was mine. I was not a woman who needed to be managed into 12 minutes away. I dried my face, changed out of my work clothes, and drove to my bank. I didn't confront Keith, not that day. Instead, I spent 2 weeks moving with the quiet efficiency I'd learned in 31 years of labor and delivery, where chaos is constant and the only useful response is calm, systematic action. First, I called Darnell Williams. He'd been wondering when I'd reach out. He said Harold had told him someday I would, and to take good care of me when I did. I asked him to send future income to a new account, mine only. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Owens, an estate and elder law attorney in Columbus that my colleague Brenda had used when her own mother's finances were mishandled. Patricia was direct in the way I needed. "The deed transfer you did after Harold's death?" she said, reviewing the paperwork I'd brought. "You put Sasha on as joint tenant with right of survivorship?" Harold suggested it, for simplicity. Did anyone explain what that meant at the time? No. "It means she has equal ownership rights now, not upon your death. Now." She paused. "However, did you sign anything else? Any agreement about the property, terms of occupancy, anything?" "Nothing." "Then here's what you need to know. As joint tenant, you retain full rights to live in the property and to sell with her agreement. She cannot force you out. What Keith told you, that you needed to leave, that was either ignorance or a lie." "Which is more likely?" Patricia almost smiled. "Real estate agent? Commercial." "Then it was a calculated misrepresentation. Either way, you have options." I told her my full financial picture. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Pearson," she said, "you are not a woman who needs Hearthstone." "No," I said, "I'm not." In those same 2 weeks, I called my retirement friend Joyce, not a nurse, a former high school principal who'd moved abroad 3 years earlier. Joyce lived in Porto, Portugal. She'd been telling me for 2 years that I needed to visit. "Lo," she'd say, "you can live here on a nurse's pension and feel like a queen." I promise you. I video called her on a Thursday evening. "I need to know if you meant it," I said. "Every word." "I'm thinking of coming." Joyce set down her wine glass. "Coming for a visit?" "Coming to stay." There was a pause, and then Joyce made a sound I can only describe as triumphant. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her. When I finished, she said, "Lou, Harold built you a boat. It's time to sail it." I spent 30 days preparing while living in the same house, eating at the same table, saying good morning to Keith and good night to Sasha, and spending every spare hour of Cleo's nap time on the phone with Joyce, with Patricia, with a financial advisor named Karen Sato who specialized in expat retirement planning. Karen walked me through my numbers with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed the work. With your assets and income streams, she said, you can live very comfortably in Porto. Cost of living is roughly 60 to 70% lower than Columbus for comparable quality of life. Your rental income alone covers a beautiful apartment. The insurance money and fidelity accounts, managed conservatively, generate additional income. You're looking at a lifestyle you couldn't afford to replicate here. And if I want to sell the Morse Road duplex? That's your call. But I'd hold it. It's appreciating, and it gives you reliable monthly income. I asked Karen what I could afford in Porto. She told me. I started looking at apartments the next day. The week I told them I chose a Sunday. I'd made a full dinner, the kind my mother made when something needed to be said over good food. Pot roast, cornbread, collard greens with smoked turkey because I'd made my health adjustments over the years, but I hadn't made them for Keith. Sweet potato pie. I set the table the way I set it for holidays. Keith commented that dinner smelled good. After Cleo was put to bed, we sat with coffee. I've made a decision about my next chapter, I said. Sasha looked at me with a particular kind of attention. She knew me. She knew when I was about to say something real. Hearthstone isn't the right fit for me. I've been looking at other options. Keith leaned forward. There's also the community in Powell that has. I'm moving to Portugal. Silence. Portugal, Sasha repeated. Porto, specifically. I've rented an apartment 2 blocks from the river. I move in 6 weeks. Keith's coffee cup went down too hard. Lou, you can't be serious. You don't speak Portuguese. You don't know anyone there. I speak enough. I have a friend there, and I find that I'm more comfortable with unknowns than I used to be. I looked at him. Keith, you told me this house was too much for one person to maintain. You told me I should be somewhere more manageable. I agreed with you. I found somewhere. It's in Porto. That's not what we meant. No, I said, it wasn't, but it's what I'm doing. Sasha was very still. Mom, where is this coming from? Where did you get you can't afford? Your father was careful with money his entire life, I said. More careful than either of us knew. He made sure I'd be fine. I am fine, Sasha. I am more than fine. I watched her absorb this. I watched her try to calculate what it meant. The house, she said finally. We'll need to discuss the house. Patricia Owens is my attorney. She'll be in touch with you this week to talk through options. The straightforward option is that you and Keith buy out my half at fair market value. The other option is we sell and split the proceeds. Keith started to speak. I held up one hand and he stopped. I am not angry with either of you, I said, and meant it. I know you love me in the way you know how to love me. I know you thought you were solving a problem, but I am 64 years old, and I am a woman with means and plans, and I would like to spend whatever time I have left on this earth living on my own terms. Your father's terms for me. He worked for 30 years to give me this choice, and I am going to honor his work by making it. The room was quiet. Sasha had tears on her face. Keith was looking at the table. I'll do everything I can to make this transition easy for you both, I said. But I'm going. 6 weeks later, I landed at Francisco Sá Carneiro Airport in Porto at 10:15 in the morning. Joyce was at arrivals in a green linen dress with her locks twisted up, holding a handwritten sign that said, Welcome, Lou, and underneath it, a small drawing of a nursing cap with a crown on top. We hugged for a long time in the middle of that terminal. You're here, she said. I'm here. How do you feel? I thought about it honestly, like I finally stopped holding my breath. My apartment was on the third floor of a 19th century building on Rua das Flores, the Street of Flowers. High ceilings, original tile work in the kitchen, tall shuttered windows that opened over a narrow cobblestone street where people walked slowly. The kind of place that invites slowness. After 31 years of hospitals, of urgency as the default register, I had not known how much I needed a place that was slow. The first weeks were hard in the way. Starting over is hard, even when you chose it. I didn't speak Portuguese beyond the basics and navigated by apology and goodwill. My pharmacist was a young man named Tomas who spoke careful English and helped me understand my prescriptions. The woman who ran the cafe on my corner, whose name I never quite caught, started leaving a small pastry with my espresso after the third week without me asking. Joyce introduced me to her circle, a retired school teacher from Jamaica, a Nigerian-British painter, a woman from Chicago who'd moved over on a whim 12 years ago and never gone back. They welcomed me with the ease of people who remembered what it felt like to arrive. But the loneliness was also real, not the performance of loneliness, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that sits with you when you're making dinner for one after a lifetime of cooking for others. The kind that finds you at 4 in the afternoon when you don't have anywhere to be and you've forgotten what you like to do when no one needs you. I worked through it the way I'd always worked through hard things. I made a list. What did Lucille Pearson like to do when no one was watching? It turned out, cook, read novels I'd been putting off, walk long distances, and teach people things. The cooking was easy. I made my mother's red beans and rice on Sunday evenings and left portions outside my door with a small note. And within 2 weeks, I had a standing dinner exchange with my neighbor across the hall, an elderly Portuguese man named Antonio, who brought me wine from his brother's vineyard in the Douro and accepted my cornbread with the serious appreciation it deserved. The walking unlocked the city. Porto is small enough to learn by foot and beautiful enough to reward daily. I found the viewpoints, the hidden staircases, the bakeries open before the tourists arrived. The teaching came by accident. A posting on the neighborhood board, handwritten, from a family looking for an English tutor for their 12-year-old. I had tutored children in reading during my years volunteering at Cleo's, at Sasha's. I had volunteered at a Columbus public school for 3 years as a reading coach. I answered the posting. The girl's name was Inems. She was 12 and furious about English irregular verbs in the way only a person with a future in the language can be. Why is go past tense went? She demanded in our first session, genuinely offended. This is a different word entirely. It is, I agreed. English borrowed it from an old German word. The language is full of historical accidents. This is a disaster. Yes, learn it anyway. She laughed. I had 3 more students by the end of the month. Sasha called in March, 4 months after I'd left. She called in the morning, my time, which meant late evening for her. I was on my small balcony with coffee, watching the street. Mom, can we talk? Really talk? Always. She cried through most of it. She talked about what it had been like to watch me shrink in my own house and tell herself it was fine. She talked about the Hearthstone plan, how Keith had presented it as obviously sensible, and she had not pushed back hard enough because she wanted it to work, wanted the house, wanted the life Keith was describing, and had not let herself look too hard at what it cost me. I knew about the list, she said. Hearthstone. I knew before Keith told you. I know, I said. You knew? I suspected. A long silence. I'm ashamed of myself. Good, I said, not cruelly, just honestly. Hold on to that. Let it teach you something. Are you ever coming back? I looked at the morning light on the building across the street, at the woman hanging laundry from an upper window, at the cart below selling bread. I don't know, I said. I love it here and building something here, but I miss you. I miss you. I miss Cleo. Those things are true at the same time. Keith and I are in counseling, she said. That surprised me. He's been honest about things I didn't know he needed to be honest about. About control. About how he moves into spaces. She paused. I think we're going to be okay, but I also think I spent years letting him make decisions I should have been making. You're talking about it. That's more than a lot of people do. Would you? Is there any chance we could visit, me and Cleo? I smiled. There is every chance. They came in June. I met them at the airport in a yellow linen dress I'd bought at a market in the Bonthim neighborhood. Cleo ran across the arrivals hall and hit me at knee height. The 3 days we had together were some of the best days I'd had in years. We walked along the river. We ate pastel de nata at every bakery in a 6-block radius because Cleo had decided to conduct a scientific ranking. We sat in my apartment in the evenings after Cleo slept, Sasha and I, and talked until midnight the way we used to when she was in college and called home late. One evening, she looked around my apartment. The tiles, the tall windows, Antonio's Duro wine on the shelf, the photographs I'd put up, Harold's tools in a small frame I'd made for one of his measuring tapes. And she said, "You're happy." I am. Dad would be so proud. I had to look away for a moment. Out the window. The light on the water. I think he'd be relieved, I said. I think that was his whole worry, that I'd be useful to everyone and happy for no one. Before they left, Sasha pressed an envelope into my hands. Inside was a card. Cleo had drawn a picture of what appeared to be a nurse in a crown standing on what appeared to be a bridge, with blue water on both sides. Underneath, in Sasha's handwriting, Cleo had dictated, "Grandma Lou is brave and lives in Portugal now and makes the best cornbread. We are so proud of her." I held that card until my flight home from the taxi stand, where I stood in the morning after dropping them and tried to figure out when I had become someone who was cried over at airports. A year after I left Columbus, I woke early from habit, coffee on the balcony before the street woke up. A cruise ship was moving on the Douro, slow and lit, heading toward the sea. My phone had messages. Joyce asking if I was coming to her birthday dinner that Saturday, Inems sending a photo of a perfect essay her teacher had returned with a red star and the word "excellent" written across the top. She had been so furious about irregular verbs. Antio, 1 floor up, a voice message asking if I had leftover cornbread. He had a cousin visiting. I had 12 students. I walked 45 minutes every morning along the river. I was 3 months into a Portuguese class at a community center near the Mercado do Bolhão, taught by an endlessly patient woman who had clearly worked with people like me before. I was writing things down, not a memoir exactly, just the things I remembered. Harold in the garage on Saturday mornings, the smell of sawdust and coffee. The night Cleo was born, how I held her first as the nurse, before I held her as the grandmother. The morning I opened the document box, the moment on the balcony with the mushroom coffee going down the drain. I had $1.5 million in assets, a duplex on Morse Road generating $2,800 a month in rent, a pension and Social Security covering my daily life in a city where everything cost less than I expected, and an apartment 2 blocks from the river with high ceilings and tiles on the kitchen floor. I had been a labor and delivery nurse for 31 years. I knew how to read the difference between an ending and a beginning. Keith had told me to transition to something more manageable. So I had. I poured my coffee, the Kroger brand I'd finally found in an international grocery 3 streets over, and raised the cup to the river in the morning light, the same small toast I made every day to the man who built me a floor before he left, and to every woman who has been called a burden by someone standing in her own house. Find something more manageable, they said. I found Porto. I found myself. I found the life Harold spent 30 years making sure I could have. It turns out manageable was just another word for free. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the morning Keith sat at Harold's table and told me I needed something more manageable. Not the afternoon I opened the document box. Not even the airport in Porto when Joyce held up that sign. The moment I keep returning to is smaller than all of those. It's me, standing at my kitchen sink, pouring mushroom coffee down the drain. Nobody watching, no audience, just a quiet decision that this was still my sink, my kitchen, my life. That's where it started, not with a lawyer or a plane ticket, with a drain. I thought a lot about why I let things go as far as they did before I acted. 14 months of adjusting my breakfast time, moving to the back porch in January, watching Harold's desk disappear into the basement. I told myself it was patience, it was family, it was love, and part of it was. But part of it was also the habit of smallness that women of my generation were trained into so early and so thoroughly that we stopped recognizing it as a choice. I wasn't being patient. I was being afraid. Afraid that if I took up space, I would be the difficult one, the selfish one, the mother-in-law who made things hard. What Keith gave me, without meaning to, was a clear enough insult that I couldn't soften it anymore. Transitioning to something more manageable. When someone finally says the quiet part loud, you can't unhear it. Here's what I believe now. At 65, standing on a balcony in Porto with Antonio's wine on the shelf and Inems's perfect essay on my refrigerator, the life you accept is the life you teach people you deserve. That is not blame. It is just cause and effect, plain as anything. For 14 months I accepted less, and so less kept being offered. The moment I stopped, the moment I picked up Harold's key and opened that box and started making calls, the equation shifted. Not because I got lucky, because I got clear. Harold was the moral center of the story in ways I'm still unfolding. A man who spent 23 years building a floor beneath someone else's feet without asking for credit, without ever saying, "Look what I did for you," without leveraging it into control. He just built it and left it for me to find. That kind of love is not romantic in the Instagram sense. It is quiet and serious and requires a person to think beyond their own lifetime. Harold had integrity in the most literal sense. His private actions matched his private values, even when no one was watching and there was no reward coming. What I had to supply was the intelligence to recognize what he'd given me and the will to use it, not recklessness. Wisdom. The difference between a woman who reacts in anger and a woman who spends 30 days making calls, consulting lawyers, researching apartments, and then sits down to a full pot roast dinner before saying a word. Sasha and Keith expected emotion. I gave them a plan. And the will. The getting on a plane at 64 with your whole life in 4 suitcases, not knowing enough Portuguese to order coffee without pointing. That is not something anyone gives you. You find it or you don't. I found it because Harold showed me it existed. Because Joyce said I meant every word. Because Cleo ran across that arrivals hall and hit me at knee height and I thought, there she is. There is everything worth being brave for. Sasha asked me once if I regretted anything. I told her the honest answer, which is that I regret the years I spent making myself small enough not to inconvenience anyone. I don't regret a single day in Porto. Find something more manageable, they said. I did. I found a life I actually wanted to live.